they say, that's going to clear out the bathroom just fine. It's like, have this Buddhist attitude. Relax.
Yeah,
Be
Brian.
patient. Breathe deep. You're not going to have mildew problems. Just let it happen when it happens. So it's all what you want. A lot of Americans want instant results.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Fine Home Building Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. I am Justin Fink. I'll be your host. Today, I'm joined by Brian Pontilillo, our esteemed design editor.
That's a new addition to the title. I like it.
We also have, backed by popular demand, editor of greenbuildingadvisor.com, Martin Holladay.
Hi, Justin.
Hello.
Hi, Brian.
Let's see, a couple of ways you can get in touch with us. You can see our show notes page at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. That's where you're going to see links to all the things that we're hopefully going to talk about today. And you can also get in touch with us directly for questions at fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And social media and whatnot. You know how to find us. So, because Martin was coming down today, and you're in town partly to do some meetings here, but partly because we have the NESI conference coming up, right?
That's right.
That's what we call it anyway, but the name is
Building Energy.
Building Energy. Any particular seminars that you're looking forward to? What's your main mission for that? You're just learning.
Yes, this year I'm not speaking or appearing on any panels. I'm just going to sessions, and I kind of just make it up as I go along. I open up the catalog, and I choose where I'm going.
Yeah. I looked through the listing of, unfortunately, people that are hearing this are going to hear it after the fact, so we're not really giving you a call to go to the show, but I was surprised by how many names speaking this year I didn't know. So I'm hoping to pop up there and find some new
up-and-comers?
Some up-and-comers.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
But anyway, so since Martin's here, we thought we would throw him onto the podcast, throw him to the wolves here. And so we don't have any listener questions that we really wanted to go through. So I just wanted to go through some topics.
I presume energy topics.
Oh, of course.
Martin, maybe we should mention, is the energy nerd and is the author of a still relatively new book.
About a year old.
Yeah, called Musings of an Energy Nerd.
It's a year old already?
You get
It's
that.
been on the market for a year.
Yeah, you can get that in the Taunton store
And
or
how
on
are
Amazon.
sales?
Sales seem to be exceeding expectations, so I
That's
think
good.
we're good.
Awesome.
Several thousand copies have been sold.
All right.
Yeah.
So people can find that on Amazon, or they can come to our website, taunton.com, tauntonpress.com, whatever.
And I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's probably the best book you can get on residential energy concerns.
Tauntonstore.com. Thanks, Jeff. I never had to buy a book from tauntonstore.com. I don't know what the website is.
We've had that luxury.
Yeah. But before we got into the other topics, and Brian, you can feel free to throw out whatever you want to talk about.
Okay.
But I wanted to selfishly steer the conversation towards a problem that I'm having at my house. As you guys know, I've talked about this in the show, my terribly placed masonry chimney, which sits in a valley and there's two ridges. One ridge is slightly lower than the other. This one sits in a valley and just below the ridge line of the lower of the two roofs. So it's like bad on top of worse in terms of leakage. And I have gone through years of iterations of trying to keep water out of my house from this chimney, and it continues to fail. And the only project that I've had worst luck trying to control water was when I tried to do the skating rink in my backyard, Brian.
I remember.
Yes, which I humbly gave up on that because I could not contain water. Now I cannot keep water out either. So initially I was just going through iterations of, fixing reflashing it, repointing it, sealing the area around the chimney with additional layers of shingling, going up there, and the next step was going to be a cricket, but it was not really a good spot for a cricket. I had talked to Martin a while back about this, and he had recommended a copper pan as kind of a solution to help scoot that water out of the valley as quickly as possible. But as luck would have it, we're coming up on the time when I'm going to start thinking about expanding into my walk-up attic for storage and for a new bathroom. So this chimney is kind of right in the way of where I want to be doing some things. So then I finally coming around to the idea of, what about dropping the chimney? And right now, I have a gas-fired furnace in the basement, and that furnace plugs into the masonry chimney, with a short length of metal duct, and then it uses the clay liner all the way up to the roof. So I wanted to explore some options and kind of get a discussion going about how do we tackle this? Because, this is a common thing. You recently, actually not recently, it's coming up in an upcoming issue. We talk about how much of an energy suck fireplaces are in general in houses, and that's going to be in the next iteration of your Musings of an Energy Nerd column in the magazine, or people can find it on Green Building Advisor. This is a slightly different twist because it's less about air leakage, although I'm sure that's part of it. Because it's the center of the house. It's a warm chimney, so it's probably, would you say it's probably less of an energy penalty than a masonry chimney on the outside of it?
You've actually brought up about 6 issues. So maybe, we could start. These are all excellent things to talk about. Can I say a few general opening gambits?
Sure.
One is that any badly flashed chimney can be flashed properly.
Yes.
And if any listeners have a similar chimney with recurrent leaks, they shouldn't give up. The trouble is finding a good roofer with an experienced flasher who's at least 60 years old and knows how to do copper work. They're hard to find, but they exist, especially in New England. And you would build a cricket of some kind. And if you have to build a massive cricket, you can build a cricket that connects your chimney to the nearest ridge and has its own hip or its own valley and its own, it's like a mini roof. And you direct all the water that's now leading towards the chimney away from the chimney with this new cricket. And it's like a doghouse roof. You can call it different things, but there's ways to shed water that's coming down the slope toward the chimney away from the side. So that's step one, and you can cover that with copper, with soldered seams. And then you can, rake away the mortar joints and insert, lead flashing or copper flashing. People are moving away from lead, that folds over onto a counter flashing, also of copper, that's soldered into that cricket. And in some cases, you may need some type of cap if the chimney itself is getting soaked and the water is actually going through the chimney.
Right.
But all of these are solvable, but expensive.
Yes.
That said, in your case, brick chimneys are kind of obsolete and probably not worth saving. And so you don't want to spend, a couple of $1,000s with an expensive flashing company to fix your chimney if you're about to pull it down. So I think the idea of demolishing the chimney, at least to the attic floor, makes sense so you can use that room.
Yes.
So at that point, you have to decide, how do I vent my furnace?
Right.
And I'm kind of, that's what I wanted to say up to this point. So now you're going to describe your furnace situation.
Well, so I had a furnace peter out on me, it was about 2011 when I moved into the house. And of course, when you're buying a new old house, first thing that goes is the furnace, like about maybe a month or two in. So replace that. I didn't go high efficiency. If I had gone to a high-efficiency gas furnace, I would have had a direct vent right then and there, and all of this would be an easy fix because now the chimney's really doing nothing.
Right.
I don't have a gas water heater. The only thing going up the chimney is the furnace.
Right.
But I don't have a high-efficiency furnace. I think it's in the 80s. I don't remember exactly what the efficiency is. So I started to wonder, all right, what are my options here? Could I run B-vent, which is B-vent is the double-walled metal vent used for exhausting gas-fired appliances.
Right.
Could I run that up through the masonry chimney until it reaches the attic, say, and then just jog it over? Like, what are the rules for offsets and bends in that kind of a thing? And then maybe just go out the roof in a different spot so that it's out of my way and it's out of danger in terms of the valley and the placement. Seems like the easier option would just be to do a direct vent, a sidewall power vent, which seem to be relatively inexpensive. Seems almost too good to be true. But I've never installed one. and I don't know that much about them.
You kind of have the worst case scenario, which is a relatively new atmospherically vented gas furnace.
Because I'm not going to replace it.
Right. So, I mean, you have a brick chimney, which is obsolete, and you've also chosen a furnace, which is on its way to being obsolete.
Correct.
Because in the future, we're not going to be using atmospherically vented appliances that
Right.
pull their combustion air from inside the house.
Right.
We're going to be using atmospherically vented appliances that have 3 advantages. They're more efficient. They don't pull air from the house, and therefore they won't backdraft if you turn on your range hood fan. And they're cheaper to vent because they go through PVC pipe through your wall.
And they can go through PVC because essentially you're wringing so much heat out of that furnace that the exhaust is only warm, really.
Precisely. It's low temperature flue gas, so it can go. So I don't think, right off the top of my head, that they make power vent kits for through the wall for an atmospherically vented furnace like the one you described. But the only way to know for sure is to contact the furnace manufacturer, give them the model number, and say, is there any way to vent this with a power vent kit through the wall? My guess is no, because your flue gas temperature is too high, and because an atmospherically vented furnace is designed to use a chimney and to have rising flue gases, and the power vent upsets the entire combustion process. But the only way to tell for sure is to check. I'm not an absolute expert on venting.
So then what are power vents typically used for, sidewall power vents?
Well, power vents are included in many new appliances, including water heaters.
Okay.
The most common type of power vent kit for a retrofit is for water heaters. I don't know if they also are available to furnaces. So rather than to delve in deeply into speculation, I'll say I don't know whether they exist. It's not really my realm of specialty. I would certainly look into it before I assumed it was possible.
Okay.
A lot of times we have people who have a question like the one you pose, where you have a bad chimney and an inappropriate furnace, and I go totally radical and I say abandon the whole system and put in a mini split.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a great time to decide whether you really want a forced air heating system in your house, or whether 1 or 2 mini splits just might take care of all of your heating and cooling needs at less cost than it would be to fix your chimney or to buy a new furnace.
Or I would think probably less cost than that would be to buy a new furnace. I mean, if you talk about just the furnace cost on its own for, I don't know, I don't remember what the BTUs is, but let's call it 80,000 BTUs. Maybe it's 60,000. Maybe it's...
My guess is you need significantly less because all furnaces in America are oversized. But let's say you need the smallest available furnace, and that'll almost always do a single-family home, which let's call it 40,000.
Okay.
But you're right. You could, for...
I'm going to call it 60,000 because that's the one I have on my screen right now for a price. And if I got the same brand of furnace, which is a Goodman, for, so let's see, 96% efficiency, it costs $866.
Right. And if you can install it yourself...
Well, can I install a furnace myself, though?
Well, you may or may not. I mean, some fine home building editors can, and I would say that still
is
not
a challenge to my.
It's not too expensive a solution, and it may be a time to upgrade your furnace. I think the idea of running B-vents straight up. Could you reuse the chimney until your attic floor, make a galvanized cap on top of the flute tile, then put a couple of 45s and route it squiggly? Possibly, but that's not what you want to do.
It's pretty, yeah.
That's a Rube Goldberg solution that was unsatisfying and not long-lasting.
Yeah.
And so I don't think you want to run B-vent up from your basement all the way to your roof, even if it's technically possible.
Have you ever installed a furnace?
Yes, I have, as a matter of fact. I called up
Have you, Brian?
What are you doing this weekend?
an oil burner guy to double-check the oil burner. I installed the oil tank and the oil fuel piping in the filter, and I installed all the duct work, but I was a little unsure on running the oil burner for the first time, so I called a burner guy to commission it.
Yeah. I mean, this is pretty much a swap 1-for-1. I mean, it's probably even the same size unit, but...
I would give a caveat that you need to be certified in gas safety to do this kind of work, so I don't recommend that homeowners in general install gas appliances. There are a lot of safety issues, especially around venting, so you don't want to guess.
Right. And there's a differentiation for these newer furnaces, at least in the Goodman furnaces, between obviously single stage, which is on or off, and then there's 2-stage, but then there's modulating. What's the difference between 2-stage and modulating?
Well, the modulating furnaces the most sophisticated ones have a fully modulating blower so that they can ramp up and match the CFM to the heating needs. and they have a modulating fuel valve for a gas valve that allows just the amount of gas into the burner that you need. So they fully modulate the BTU output of the burner and the CFM of the blower.
Okay.
And so you get a totally smooth ramp up and ramp down.
So we either have one stage, two stages, just high and low.
Right.
And then modulating is more like a gradient of.
Exactly.
Okay. Gotcha.
And the high-low is a big improvement over a
Sure.
single-stage furnace, and it handles a lot of situations totally adequately. But the fully modulating ones are great.
Yeah. Sounds like I'm going to be getting some quotes for a new furnace.
Wow.
Well, I got to at least see, right?
Well, demolishing a brick chimney is fun.
I know. I've done it before. In fact, that was one of the first projects I ever did in home building was, well, aside from the stuff with my dad when I was a kid, but when I was coming up and learning, I was working for, doing a build with Habitat for Humanity, and we were knocking down a chimney right in the center of a house. It's pretty satisfying. Yeah.
You got to protect your roofing, but it's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It's satisfying, and it's not that hard. And you can reuse the brick for something else, but I don't know. So another thing, Rob is not on the podcast today, but in his honor, I wanted to ask a question because he's struggling with this right now. And this is sort of a multi-part kind of a thing about bath ventilation fans.
Okay.
He's working on his attic. Well, if we call his is really a second floor.
Yeah.
Because it's
a
not
cape.
But parts of it have a cathedral ceiling. So he's right because he's talking about where to run his bath fan through.
All right.
And so one option he was considering is through wall.
Right.
And my thoughts on that are, well, and we talked about this in a previous show. How do you really air seal that? I mean, does anybody make a through wall bath vent that's really, really something you feel like you can stand behind and feel good about? Or are they all sort of just a big thermal bypass?
I think that even Panasonic makes a bath fan designed for walls. And I have heard a few people install certain models that they complain about. I don't know which models they are, but I wouldn't hesitate to install a bath exhaust fan high in a wall if it was sold for through wall installation.
And would you ever go through a roof, or would you just avoid that at all costs?
I would even go through a roof. I mean, you have to be realistic. You
Yeah.
know, it's better to have a bath fan than no bath fan, and sometimes you have to go through the roof. If it's a hipped roof and there's no gable wall to go to, you have limited options. There's even a new soffit kit, which may allow you to, for the first time, to recommend venting through a soffit.
The easy soffit thing?
Yeah, I think that's the name. I referred to it I did a GBA review a few months ago.
What is it about it? What's different that?
Well, it was designed by someone who knows what they're doing. It's got directional louvers, and the entire mounting process is very well thought out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the way it throws air away from the building ensures that it's unlikely to introduce humid air into the soffit vents and unlikely to create icicles, which is the problem with the old style vents. And it has a good backdraft damper.
So you're saying you would, I was expecting you to say that it's okay to ventilate it or vent it through the soffit if that's not a vented roof.
Well, that would be ideal.
But you're saying even if it's a vented
You know,
soffit.
people break rules all the time, and you have to use common sense.
Yeah.
Do I think that if you put one of these easy vents in your soffit, you would have a disastrous moisture problem in your attic? Probably not. You know, it blows for, depending on how you use your bath fan, it doesn't blow for 24 hours a day in most cases, although it would if it were used for whole house ventilation.
Sure.
But the amount of moisture that enters your attic that way is going to be small.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to ask you. Have you ever actually seen a lot of damage from a bath venting into an attic?
I have.
You have?
And, you know, a lot of people have lazily exhausted their bath vents right into the attic.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not it's a problem depends on how humid their bathroom is, how often they run it, but also how well vented the attic is in general. A lot of attics just, you know, there's a lot of light you can see coming through all kinds of cracks, you know, and it depends on how the soffit and ridge details are and whether it's well ventilated. But if it's a tight, small attic that really has no ventilation and you blow a bath fan there and it's a humid bath where the people take several showers a day, yeah, you could have black mold on the sheathing and rafters near where that bath vent is blowing.
Well, plus you get in the winter, at least in cold climates, you have the condensation freezing, and then when it warms up, it drips down.
Right.
and you end up having water spots on your drywall and ceiling. And
So I think it's a good rule to always vent your bath fan to the exterior. It's not only a good rule, it's code required.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have to. But, we're discussing something that's vented to the soffit, which is different. Most of that air is going outside.
so you mentioned the code, and that's kind of funny because Rob he ultimately decided to not do the through wall.
Okay.
For concerns about, am I going to have, gusts of cold air blowing through? Is it going to be able to stay comfortable in the bathroom? So he said, I'm going to go up through the roof. And I think he has a little bit of attic space, like enough to crawl in or something. So he was, but he has to have sort of a convoluted duct system to get up and out the roof. So he started sniffing down the path of how big does my fan need to be to overcome
right.
curves and twists in the pipe, in the vent pipe, and he was claiming that he couldn't really find reliable answers. I was under the impression that was listed somewhere. How do you usually advise people on that?
I think there are tables that talk about like the how each fitting, like each elbow, is equivalent to so many linear feet of straight ductwork.
Yeah.
But I would say if you know your ductwork is going to be convoluted, there are two approaches. Is you can go to 6-inch ductwork instead of 4-inch ductwork, go up a size. Or you can get, I think it's the Whisper Green. One of the Panasonic fans has an adjustable feature to get the CFM you want, and you can ramp it up if needed to adjust for convoluted ductwork. In other words, your energy bill will always be a little higher forever, but you really have to increase the speed of the fan to get the CFM you're aiming for.
Yeah.
So there are models out there that can handle that. And if you test it when you commission it, and most people don't, but there's a variety of ways to test airflow through a recently installed bath fan. You can find out what the number of CFM you're getting and then adjust it as needed to get there.
Okay.
So, are excessive energy use and heat loss the only concerns with an oversized bath fan?
It could be noise, I guess, once you get to a bigger motor.
Right. You don't want an oversized bath fan for the three reasons you two have just mentioned.
You want to backdraft your furnace.
Right. I think I would rather see a slightly underpowered bath fan run for more minutes after a shower than a big, hugely oversized fan wasting energy.
Oh, man, just 2 shows ago, remember I was talking about how I love my oversized fan.
Well, it's funny because
it's getting every bit of steam that comes out of that shower.
People are really
immediately.
People have strong opinions on bath fans. Some people hate any condensation on their mirror. Other people hate the idea of a big fan wasting energy in their house.
Well, I have these low ceilings, and when you bring a shower curtain or glass up over close to the ceiling, you're in a small bath. You're really creating a ton of moisture.
Right.
And our previous bath had major problems with mildew and mold growth because of. And there was a bath fan that we were running. It just wasn't getting enough air out fast enough.
Right.
And so, I just went big. I went with the biggest fan I could put in there, and it's
and
it's working.
It works.
It
sure.
works.
Right.
So it might be louder than I need.
There's no arguing with success.
It's quiet.
Yeah.
And
as long as you don't
wasting energy.
leave it on all day, it's not a big deal.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think Rob ended up with not being able to make heads or tails out of the vent pipe requirements, and he, for better or worse, just said, "Well, whatever. I'm going to get a 110 CFM, and that's either going to do it or it's not going to do it. But who really cares? Because according to code, all I really need to have is an operable window, and I've got that. How is that still the code?
I don't know how that's still the code, but it is still the code.
If you have a window that works, you don't need a bath fan. Unbelievable. So that's good to know about the through-wall vent, though, because that might come in handy for me, too. I've only dealt with removing the old ones, and they have always felt like because you're putting this thing in your wall cavity, and that means that you can't put insulation in that spot. So even the best fan...
you can't put insulation in your ceiling if you've got a bath fan there either.
If it's a direct through, like if it's a cathedral ceiling, yeah, but... if it's an attic space, you could just mount the insulation up and over.
Right.
And
that's true enough.
Right.
So you have less of an insulation penalty. I'll grant you that.
Yeah, with the wall, you have none in that spot.
I think what it is there's always air leaking through a ceiling fan too, but it's usually exfiltration, not infiltration. Whereas with a wall vent, it could be either infiltration or exfiltration, depending on which way the wind is blowing. So you're likely to notice it more, but it may not actually be more air leakage.
Yeah, okay. Might just be a little less comfortable.
Right. A little less comfortable as possible.
And
depending on how windy that wall is.
Do you Certainly we didn't mention this, but you can also use an HRV or an ERV ventilation system and just have a boost switch, right? That handles that.
And we've had this discussion on GBA a lot. Like some people who put in a new HRV that's ducted to pull the air from their bathrooms say, do I also need a regular bath exhaust fan?
Yeah.
And, people like Brian say, absolutely. I want a second one that just is 150 CFM with a big throw switch on the wall, and I want to hear it go. And the people who are happy with their HRVs, let's just say they're only drawing 30 CFM continuously. They say, that's going to clear out the bathroom just fine. It's like have this Buddhist attitude. Relax.
Yeah, Brian.
Be patient. Breathe deep. You're not going to have mildew problems. Just let it happen when it happens. So it's all what you want. A lot of Americans want instant results.
Yeah.
So I always say, try your HRV with 20 or 30 CFM continuous, and you may be happy even without the boost switch. But if you're the kind of person who wants more, you've either got the boost switch, and if that still doesn't make you happy, put in a fan. I mean, it's your house. You want it to operate the way you like.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the owner's expectations.
Brian, do we have you rethinking your bath fan?
No, I just want a healthy home.
Right.
Oh, Martin, can we pick your brain about, I know that you get a lot of questions about spray foam.
Oh, boy.
We sure do.
And it comes up on this show constantly because it's often treated, for better or worse, as just spray it and all of these problems go away. It collapses a lot of different functions into one layer.
Right.
It's very hands-off. I pick up the phone and I call somebody and they come in and spray it and my life is easy. Yeah. Not that, you can do that for any installation, but... So where do you come down on it? How often are you answering questions and recommending that people go that route? Do you feel like it's kind of as much of a panacea as everybody says it is, or is it?
Well, I think it's indispensable for some retrofit situations. When you have an older house, if you have a fieldstone foundation that needs to be insulated, a basement, there's really no alternative to closed cell spray foam on the inside of the stone walls because of the irregular surface. If you have certain air sealing problems in cramped attic spaces or certain cathedral ceilings where you're not going to go above and change anything on the exterior, it's a great way to solve existing house problems. Mm-hmm. On a new house, it's often used poorly or inappropriately, I think. I mean, when designing walls, we will say again and again at Green Building Advisor how we really like rigid foam on the outside of the wall. It just solves so many problems. And you can get recycled rigid foam now for next to nothing, for 1/3 of the price of new foam, if you're a greenie and like to recycle. But, it stops the thermal bridging through the studs. It reduces air leakage. It warms up everything. So when people want to spray foam between the studs, they haven't addressed the thermal bridging. So the studs are still bleeding air, and if you've got a thermal camera, you can see those red stripes even after you've spray foamed. And it seems a shame that people will spend a lot of money on closed cell spray foam for an only marginal increase in R value compared to old-fashioned fiberglass, when they could be putting 2 to 3 inches of rigid foam on the outside of their wall and having a wall that performs, unbelievably orders of magnitude better than the kind of crappy wall they put together with spray foam. Mm-hmm. And, I wrote an article for Green Building Advisor called Closed Cell Spray Foam Between Studs is a Waste. And it just looked at, the routine example of installing 2.5 to 3 inches of closed cell spray foam in your wall studs. You start to do the math. You calculate the thermal bridging through the studs, which is still there, and try to find out how much better that is from a cellulose insulated wall or a fiberglass insulated wall. And it's not that much better.
Yeah.
So, especially since it costs so much more, we need to convince builders and carpenters to not be freaked out by exterior rigid foam. And some people say, well, my builder's never done it. My builder doesn't want to put foam on the walls. But it's a lot better to put the rigid foam than the spray foam. Now, we're comparing two different products that are doing two different things. So when you need spray foam, it's great, but it's often used inappropriately.
Is that the only example you can think of a situation, the Fieldstone Foundation, where it's really the only solution that makes sense? Well,
you can almost always solve a problem without any spray foam. but it's really great for air sealing old houses.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it has to do with access and cost. I mean, are there air sealing problems if someone has a philosophical objection to spray foam that can be solved other ways? Yeah, but it might involve like expensive tapes and gaskets and getting down your hands and knees in funny spots and still having a really tough situation.
Yeah. And what do we need to know about open cell versus closed cell? Kind of the when to choose which one.
Well, I think the biggest kind of issue with open cell spray foam is when used on the underside of roof sheathing to make a conditioned attic. Experience has shown that we have mysterious moisture problems in the attics that are created that way, which that same moisture problem does not exist if closed cell spray foam was used in the same way.
Where does the moisture problem show up specifically?
The moisture problem shows up, first of all, to the homeowner as the entire attic space becomes humid, the most humid room in the house. People will say, I put my head through the attic access hatch and my glasses steam up. Or I put a hygrometer in my attic and my house is at 35 degrees relative humidity and it's like 65 up there and I can't figure out what's going on.
I bet you get the glasses thing more than the hygrometer thing.
They're just very moist rooms.
Honey,
and
grab the hygrometer.
it's a very complicated building science mystery. And the short version is even building scientists are arguing on the mechanism. But it appears to be the moisture is being stored in the roof sheathing, in the plywood or the boards behind the spray foam. Every night, it kind of hides there like mice that go into the walls. And then every day when the sun comes out, the sun drives that moisture right through the open cell foam back into the attic. And they call it ping pong moisture. And if you have closed cell spray foam, you've got a barrier between the sheathing boards, which is a kind of reservoir, and the humidity in the attic, and that phenomenon doesn't happen. And that whatever moisture exists in that house gradually is circulated or dissipated, whereas it gets so concentrated by having that reservoir there. Now, there's a certain elements of this explanation that are dissatisfying, and I'm not completely convinced that the building scientists are properly explaining it. And there are several solutions if you have this problem. Generally, you want to put a forced air register and maybe a return up there so that it's being air conditioned in summer and heated in winter.
I mean, why not? We do it for crawl spaces, right?
The reason why not is it's a violation of the fire codes.
Oh.
You're not allowed to have air communication between a spray foamed attic and the rest of the house unless all of the spray foam is covered with taped drywall. And no spray foam installer is putting taped drywall up because it costs too much.
And in this situation, with the open cell foam and the moisture issues in the attic, are we assuming that this is an unvented roof assembly?
Yes.
Okay.
This would be called an unvented conditioned attic.
Yeah.
And it's a very common detail in Texas and Florida, in states where they routinely put forced air ductwork in the attic. And that ductwork is a huge energy nosebleed. It's wasting 20% of all the energy for air conditioning and heat because all the leaks in the attic are wasting the energy. So by encapsulating the attic, you're bringing it within the thermal envelope, which is great. But by using open cell spray foam, they're getting these humidity problems.
So then we've also heard a lot that you don't want to use closed cell in that situation in case you're having any sort of water leaks from the outdoor side from the roof that with your closed cell you won't know about problems in the roof.
I've heard of that theory, but I don't take that seriously.
Because you haven't actually seen examples of it?
Well, for a couple of reasons. First of all, of the two issues we've described, the moisture issue with open cell foam is far more serious. The hypothetical problem of not being able to see a roof leak with closed cell, I think, is mostly a marketing invention of the open cell foam industry.
Wow.
I can tell you that water still comes through even if you have a closed cell.
Right. I mean, that's the basic story. The basic story is every roof eventually leaks. When you have a roof leak, you eventually get a wet ceiling. And when you have a wet ceiling, you eventually have the possibility of roof sheathing damage and the need for a new roof. And this is just a rule of roofing. I used to be a roofer. Every single roof fails eventually. And eventually, the water stains show up somewhere. And I don't think the closed cell foam changes the detection time that much. I honestly don't. It finds its way.
If you had this open cell foam situation, could you not solve the ping pong moisture that you're talking about by having above the roof deck ventilation, like a
You-
so-called cold
You
roof?
could. You could also have ventilation between the spray foam and the roof deck if you thought ahead. And a lot of people have done that. They'll actually put ventilation baffles in just as if they were putting fiberglass, like it was a cathedral ceiling, before they install the spray foam. And that works.
Yeah, you almost never see people do that. The vented with spray foam.
Right. And it's
Because they want to get that depth of insulation, right?
that's one of the reasons. And they want to be in and out quick. And the spray foam contractors don't care.
Right.
I mean, they just want to say this works. Now, the spray foam industry is starting to admit that, in fact, they have a problem. And I've heard Rick Duncan is the head of the Spray Polyurethane Manufacturers Association, and he's told me privately, actually on the record, that, yeah, we've got a problem here, and we're working on solutions.
Specifically the open cell.
The open cell
is-
moisture,
What's the
moist
theory? Why do people do it? What are they trying?
People do it because
It'll breathe. That's
the main reason open cell is used rather than closed cell is it's 1/3 or 1/4 the price.
Okay.
It's cheaper. It's cheaper per R and it's cheaper per inch.
Yeah.
So, and you know, a lot of people have been convinced that it's easier to find a roof leak. So some people say that that's an advantage.
So I saw something recently.
Go for it.
If I can, still on spray foam, but a little bit different. I saw someone recently saying that they were seeing failures where spray foam was applied to the back of zip sheathing. And I've only seen this in one place, but the builder claims that he's seen it now on multiple projects.
Now, when you say failure, describe the failure.
Failure to install properly, failure to adhere to stick to the back of the sheathing during an installation. And he claimed that he has had this on multiple projects, and when he's using regular OSB as the wall sheathing, that he's had no problem. So I was just curious if that was a one-off. Maybe it's bad installation, you know, or if you've heard anything about
Well, it's
that.
the first I've heard of it. So
Okay.
I'm curious. I mean, my first instinct would be to check temperature. You know, a lot of people are installing in cold conditions when they're not supposed to. But if you know the guy is to be believed, it's worth looking into. The thing is, what constitutes a failure? Is it an air pocket? Has it somehow fallen off?
He actually showed a photo where this stuff was just lying on the floor, like where it had just fallen off. And like I said, this was. I'm only asking about this because you're here, and this was one instance. And I know that there's a lot of spray foam being applied to a lot of zip sheathing these days.
Right.
So it was the only reason to give it any credence was because he did say on multiple projects.
Yeah.
And that he didn't see the same failures with OSB. And that's why I wanted to ask.
You know, you've perked up my interest, and I will certainly pay attention. I mean, I know that spray foam installers have sprayed right over condensation and frost, and you know, then they blame something else. I'm not saying that this contractor did, but every idiot mistake that you think would never happen has happened.
happens,
Spray foam installers have tried to install when it's really cold right over frost. That wouldn't be a good thing.
Do you think any carpenters have ever been foamed into a wall cavity?
Just tools?
Because that's
kind of like surgeons leaving their tools inside the cavity.
that stuff goes on pretty hot.
That would be
You'd not want to be
great
sprayed with
April Fool's thing for fine home building.
Look like a Han Solo with
Yes,
the carbonite.
that's what I was thinking.
Can I circle back to foam and roofs? Because you mentioned the third of the cost of using recycled foam, which is attractive, and we know old Patrick for one has used that. He used it on his barn.
Yeah.
I think he had a little bit of trouble with because it's a mixture. It's usually like commercial foam, like from roofs and things that get torn
Right, and
off.
the quality varies. I've heard of people who with just perfect, brand new looking stuff, and other people saying, "Oh, the thicknesses were uneven,
that's what he
and
had.
the corners were broken." So, you know, ideally, you can buy it from someone where you get a chance to inspect it before you buy the whole truckload.
Yeah.
Well, and at that price, you can assume a certain amount of waste and still have it be worth.
That's the other way to do it. You say it was
Right.
headed for the landfill anyway, and if I throw away 20%, I'm still, you know, doing an environmental good. you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, if you, depending on what you're doing, like if you just have to maybe just kind of group it by thickness, you know,
Exactly.
This plane of the house has this thickness, and an
Right.
1/8 inch difference over here doesn't matter because it's not
Right.
It's not
As long as you're getting.
flush.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, for somebody who wants to retrofit foam onto a roof, do we have to strip off all the shingles? Or is there a situation like, can a homeowner say, I've got one layer of shingles on my roof and I want to go this route of like an energy retrofit? I've added bats in my
I don't
ceiling
think there's
cavity.
any technical reason why you have to pull off the shingles. I just
It's a good opportunity to check your roof deck.
right. There was a case that we're going to be highlighting in Green Building Advisor in an upcoming article where a flat-roofed old 1950s office building was retrofitted with raised heel trusses right on top of the flat roof. There were no parapets. And the architect inspected the black membrane roof and said, this is a recent roof. This is great. This is our air barrier. And then just blew 18 inches of cellulose right on top of the flat roof membrane.
Cool.
No reason to remove the roofing. In other words, roofing doesn't always do any harm.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess there may be some situations where a chemically sensitive person might wonder if there's an asphalt smell that would ever get into the house. But to me, if it's on the roof, it's not connected by air to the inside of your house. And I don't think one layer of asphalt shingles would cause any problems. That said, it's a great opportunity to inspect the deck. So if you can strip your shingles, you can knock the shingles off a roof in a few hours with some young guys with shovels. You know, it doesn't take that long to strip a roof, although you do have to get a dumpster.
Then you got to do something with the shingles.
That's what I always say. These guys don't want to strip roofs.
It's brutal, Brian.
I love it.
You love the weirdest things. Painting, sweeping, and stripping roofs. Those are your three favorite things. What a little bit of exaggeration. What are your thoughts on house wrap? You're extolling the virtues of putting foam on the outside of a house.
Right.
So what is the ideal system of layers? Because I've heard WRB, no WRB, WRB behind the foam or on top of it. So
all of those are possible. First of all, let me clarify. Every house needs a WRB, which is a water-resistant barrier by code.
Yes.
If you choose not to use house wrap, you can choose asphalt felt, a liquid applied membrane, and in some cases you can choose rigid foam itself as a WRB. But in no cases can you have no WRB.
Well, what are the cases where you can choose the foam?
Legally, they're very narrow. In order to qualify as a WRB, the manufacturer of the foam has got to apply to the code authorities and prove through laboratory testing that it is equivalent to asphalt felt in its performance as a WRB. And the last time I looked into it, I think 3 or 4 foam manufacturers had
done that.
And if you follow their protocol, you have to use exactly the same tape as they use and the exact same flashing systems they use at windows and doors, or it doesn't meet the exceptions allowed in the code. I don't think there are 4 code authorities in the country who know this, so nobody ever catches you on it if you don't. I think very few people follow the protocol, but that's the actual legal.
Performance-wise, though, I mean, is it dangerous?
Performance-wise, the hardest part of using foam as a WRB is you can't lap anything.
Yeah.
So that when you're integrating your flashing at your windows and doors, the house wrap can be lapping over your head flashing, and it all goes, which I think is the way to do it. You don't want to depend on tapes. So in general, with the rigid foam systems, they depend on tapes, although you can use these Z flashings at the horizontal joints, and those can be flexible flashings or even galvanized if you want, or aluminum.
Yeah, I remember.
So you can do ways to lap, but it's more complicated. So I say, just buy the house wrap. What does it cost to, $180 for a roll or 2, whatever.
But then I've heard, and I don't know if this advice has changed, but Building Science Corp was recommending the use of a drainable house wrap behind foam.
Right.
And that even
in some circumstances, not in all cases.
That even an air gap back there, because even if it's small, really, it seems intuitively like, I don't want an air gap behind my foam, so I have cold air or warm air flowing behind it. But the science is claiming it doesn't make a difference.
Here's what Joe Stiebrick is worried about. You don't want OSB sheathing to be encapsulated on both sides. You can maybe get away with it with boards and plywood, but with OSB is funny stuff. It gets a little moist, it cycles, it rots really fast. So Joe Stiebrick was worried about walls with closed-cell spray foam between the studs and exterior rigid foam, which is rare. I think it's a dumb idea, but some people were doing it. He says, look, if you're going to do that with OSB, you better use a wrinkly wrap or even some type of air, one of those cedar breather type
you're saying it's a dumb idea for using OSB in that situation, or having foam on both sides?
Foam on both sides. I think if you want rigid foam on the outside, which is great, and you want spray foam between the sides, this is a great application for open cell, because open cell breathes to the interior. But closed cell on the interior and rigid foam, now you've made this sandwich that traps the OSB.
But
So I
if
think-
it wasn't OSB, if it was board sheathing or plywood, or
It would be a little safer, but I think still encapsulating them is dumb. I would just say thumbs down on that idea. Just choose, and I think cellulose would be even better between the studs. Like, why have spray foam if you've got rigid foam on the outside?
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of people that already have it, maybe, or are trying
Right.
to attack it from both sides. Like, well, I've got 2x4 stud cavities, and so I'm
Right.
going to put 2 inches of foam.
A lot of people think that way.
Yeah.
But that's where the wrinkle wrap becomes arguably important. And the idea is you don't really get ventilation, although you get a little bit of air movement. You get a little bit of redistribution of moisture, so that if there's a concentrated moisture point for whatever reason on one part of the OSB, it won't rot as fast. It'll kind of have the ability through capillarity and the small amount of air there to be redistributed and eventually dry out.
Cool.
And I guess that's cool. But the basic question that you raised at the beginning was, where does the house wrap belong? The house wrap belongs wherever it makes the most sense to integrate with your window flashings.
Okay.
So if you're doing what I call outie windows
Yep.
on the outside plane of the rigid foam, you're going to want your house wrap on the outside of the foam. If you are doing any windows with the window flanges against the OSB, then you probably have your house wrap right against the OSB and your rigid foam outside of it. And it's as simple as that. And you have to think through all of your flashing details. What do you do at the window sill if you have any windows? How do you convey the water from your rough opening out to the outer plane so you're not trapping water inside? I mean, I think the outie windows are easier to detail, but you can definitely detail any windows. And that's usually the decision on where your house wrap goes, because your house wrap is basically there to be integrated with your window and door flashing.
I wonder, how do you even install house wrap over thick foam? How do you fasten it?
You fasten it with basically cap nails. They make long cap nails
All the way through to the sheathing?
all the way through.
Well, that sounds like fun. Right. Well, we got to let you go because I know you gotta shove off. But we appreciate you swinging by for a quick episode with us, and we encourage everybody to check out greenbuildingadvisor.com. Sign up for the membership there. You get Martin's blog, and you get 1,000,001 other things. It is a super deep and robust site, and Martin is always continuing to make it deeper and better. And I know there's some potential website upgrades coming soon, or improvements coming soon. So we're gonna throw that out there to make it official.
All right.
See if we can get that in the works.
Well, it's been fun. Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Brian.
All right,
Thanks,
guys. Take care, and we'll see you all next week. In the meantime, you know where to find us, fhbpodcast@taunton.com. Find homebuilding.com/podcast. And this is Justin signing off for everybody at the table. Keep craft alive and happy building.